In this lesson, we'll begin our discussion of the male reproductive system. We'll take a look at the different major organs that are laid out in the male reproductive system, and then that we'll be covering in these subsequent lessons. And in this lesson, we'll focus on the anatomy of the scrotum as well as the anatomy of the testicle or the testes. So on this slide, it lays out pretty much the major structures that we're going to be studying. As I said, in this lesson, we're going to study the scrotum and the testes. Then in subsequent lessons, we'll take a look at some of the major ducts that are going to carry, sperm and semen. This would be the epididymis. We'll take a look at the ductus deferens, right? You may know that as the vas deferens. We'll take a look at the ejaculatory ducts, and then we'll finish up the duct work by taking a look at the urethra. We'll see that the urethra is even shared with the urinary system. We'll also take a look at the major sex glands. The first two, the seminal gland or the seminal vesicles, and the prostate, these contribute to the semen, and then the bulbourethral glands contribute to just normal sexual function. And then we'll finish up the reproductive system as far as the anatomy. We'll take a look at the penis, which includes the erectile tissue and that type of thing. All right, so these are the major organs. So in this lesson, like I said, we're going to do the scrotum and the testicle or the testes. So let's start with the scrotum. You can think of the scrotum as a fleshy pouch. It's really just kind of a place to hold the testes, and that's its job. It's going to be to support the testes. It's nothing more than loose skin and then some underlying subcutaneous tissue, like some kind of fatty tissue, and that scrotum is actually suspended from the root of the penis. So if we go to a picture here, this is an anterior view of the male pelvis. We can see the scrotum here. We just kind of follow the skin right along my cursor here. All of this would be the scrotum like that. All right, and you can see that the scrotum actually has two cavities we're going to look at. This would be the left scrotal cavity in here or chamber, and then this would be the right scrotal cavity or chamber here, and the two testes are separate. Okay, so that's where the scrotum would be hanging from the root of the penis. Now, as I said, there's two chambers. If we go back to this picture, this is going to be the scrotal septum. It's connective tissue, this white line right here, guys. This is the connective tissue that's separating the left and the right scrotal cavities. If you were to look at where the septum is out on the skin here, you would see almost like a raised ridge. It looks like a seam sometimes. That is known as the raphe or the raphe. That marks where the scrotal septum is. And by the way, just so you know, septum means wall. Anytime you hear the word septum, it's a wall. We'll see a septum in the heart. In A&P1, you may have studied the nasal septum. All right, so it's a good word to know. And the fact that the two testes are in individual chambers means that the testicles won't become tangled, and that would be devastating, or that could actually cause necrosis and death to the testicle. Okay. So we have the two chambers again. The raphe or the raphe is that external ridge. Again, when I look at it or see it, it looks like a seam to me, but it indicates or marks the partition of the two scrotal chambers, and it tells us where the scrotal septum is, and then that septum is going to divide the scrotum into two cavities. Now, the scrotum has a lining that's known as a serous membrane. Remember that a serous membrane produces like a thin, slippery fluid which helps to reduce friction. So the lining is in two places inside the scrotum. It lines the wall of the scrotum, like the inner wall of the scrotum. You would call that the parietal tunica vaginalis. Again, remember parietal means wall. And then the same lining that's on the testicle or the testes is known as the visceral tunica vaginalis. So if we would take a look back at that picture over here, we can see this kind of pinkish line right here. This would be lining the inside wall of the scrotum, and then the same tissue would be on the testicle. The one lining the wall of the scrotum you're going to call the parietal layer. The one that's on top of the testicle, covering the testicle, is the visceral layer. Now, there's a space between the one on the testicle and lining the wall, and then in that little space there would be a little bit of that serous fluid. Like I said, that's going to reduce the friction. Okay, so that's everything for this slide. Let's take a look at a couple other scrotal structures. There are two muscles that are associated with the scrotum and even the testicles. We'll take a look at the dartos muscle first. This is a bands of smooth muscle that are actually in the skin of the scrotum. When they contract, it actually causes the skin to wrinkle, and we'll see on the subsequent slide. This here is important in actually temperature control. You can probably guess the reason that the testes are held outside of the body inside the scrotum is to keep the testicles cooler than body temperature, and we'll talk about that on another slide. Now there's another muscle that's just deep to the dermis, right? So deep meaning underneath the dermis. It's known as the cremaster muscle, and its job is to actually raise the testes towards the pelvic floor of the male. Again, if it's cold, the testes would be raised to warm the testes up. If it's hot, the testes will descend, and the cremaster will relax. It's also important, the cremaster muscle, to sexual function. During even ejaculation, the testes need to be up against the pelvic floor, and it's the cremaster muscle that brings it up there. So the dartos muscle would be, here's the skin of the scrotum. The dartos muscle is again the line just inside of that, and then this muscle here is going to be the cremaster muscle. Notice the cremaster muscle goes all the way up to the pelvic floor. This way, when it contracts, it can move the testes up. All right, so the dartos muscle is in the skin. The cremaster muscle is just underneath the skin. But both of those are important in temperature regulation. So normal sperm production requires a temperature, 2 to 3 degrees below normal body temperature, and the two muscles will work together. So the dartos and the cremaster muscles, they both contract, and like I said before, the cremaster is going to move that testicle closer to the body so that it will warm the testes, especially if it's cold. The dartos muscle will tighten the skin of the scrotum, which helps to again retain heat, but it's the dartos muscle that gives the testicle, it's kind of like a wrinkled appearance when it's cold. When it's warm, the skin of the skin of the scrotum has a much more smooth appearance. But the whole concept is these muscles are going to help regulate the body temperature. And this is one of the reasons too, when men are being checked for infertility, a lot of times the doctor that's checking them, will see, what kind of underwear they wear. If they wear like a tight brief that keeps the testes up against the pelvic floor, it may be the problem that the testes are too warm all the time. So they'll change over to like a boxer short, and a lot of times, if that was the issue, that'll take care of the infertility problem for the male. Okay. All right, so this is a good picture. Again, it's just showing the scrotum, the tunica vaginalis. We're seeing the muscles pretty much, and then we'll go to these other structures in a subsequent lesson. Okay, so again, here's just a side view. This is a sagittal view of the same structures. We can see nicely the scrotum here, kind of hanging right from the base of the penis over here. It's anterior to the rectum and the anus. You can see right here. So let's finish this lesson by taking a look at the testes. Sometimes people say they're the testicles, either or. These are a pair of oval glands, right? We have two of them. They're suspended, as I said, in the scrotum. And the two real main functions is that this is where the male sex hormones or androgens are produced, right? The main androgen being testosterone. But secondly, this is also where the male gametes are produced, known as the sperm or spermatozoa. We'll talk about that at our very last lesson, just a quick overview of how sperm is produced. Now, the male testicles aren't in the scrotum from the very beginning. During fetal life, they're up in the body cavity adjacent to the kidneys, kind of almost like where the ovaries are in the female. Around the 7th month of fetal life, the testicles are going to actually descend through the inguinal canals. I'll show you that on the next lesson. And then they enter the scrotum. All right, so they need to come down from the abdominal cavity through the inguinal canals into the scrotum. Actually, let me show you that here, just to kind of give you an idea. So here's the one testicle. That testicle, when it was up in the abdomen, goes through right here. There's actually a ring known as the inguinal ring, right? It's like a ring. I don't know if you can see that circle right there. That would be the inguinal ring. The testicle will actually enter that, descend through the inguinal canal all the way down to here, and then what remains in that inguinal canal, we'll see, and again a subsequent slide lesson, excuse me, is the spermatic cord. Right, so the testes make their way down all the way to here. Okay, so let's take a look at the anatomy of the testicle. Let's take a look at the tunica albuginea. This is a covering on the testes that is a white fibrous capsule. It's just inside the tunica vaginalis. Again, remember that tunica vaginalis is that serous membrane of the scrotum, and this capsule is composed of collagen fibers. Right. So if you ever get a chance to do dissection, either on a human or on a fetal pig or something like that, or a cat, when you actually cut the scrotum and you cut away the tunica vaginalis, you'll see that the testes look white. Now, this connective tissue, these collagen fibers actually extend from the outside and they project to the inside of the testes to form these fibrous partitions known as septa. Again, what does septa mean? Walls. And what these little septa are going to do is going to divide the inside of the testes into lobules. So let me show you what I mean by that. This is a picture where we've cut the testicle on a transverse section just to show you some of the things that we can see. Out here is the skin. We could see some fascia here. This would be the dartos muscle right over here. And I'll take it back. This is the cremaster muscle. Sorry about that. The cremaster muscle. Here's your tunica vaginalis. This is going to be the parietal layer. Then there's the tunica vaginalis. This is going to be the visceral layer. But the tunica albuginea is the white tissue right here. You can see some of it right above my cursor. That's covering the whole testes, and then projecting in from the tunica albuginea are these white lines. So each white line is dividing the testicle into these little cavities or chambers. So each one of these, if this was empty, this would be a lobule. If this one was empty, it would be a lobule. Right? So those are all the different lobules that we can see on this picture. On the microscope, you can see here, these white lines would be the septa. And then these are the seminiferous tubules in the lobule. Okay, so the lobule is the compartment formed by the septa. Look at this. There's about 200 to 300 lobules. Now, each lobule, like I said, is not empty. It contains a tube that's important for you to know. These are called the seminiferous tubules. There's anywhere from 1 to 3 tightly coiled tubes, right? So just know that the seminiferous tubules are in the lobule. It's the seminiferous tubule that produces the sperm. And each seminiferous tubule is about 80 centimeters long. If you kind of tied them all together, look at this, you would see there's nearly a half a mile of seminiferous tubules in each testicle, right? So you put it together, it's about a mile of seminiferous tubules in the testes. So that's a lot of tubes, but again, the male needs to produce a lot of sperm for reproduction. Okay, so if we look in the seminiferous tubules, we'll see that there's two main types of cells. The main cells that produce the sperm are the spermatogenic cells. These produce the sperm. The second one is going to be the nurse cells. These are more important in overseeing the process of spermatogenesis. They kind of, make sure that the environment within this seminiferous tubule is normal. It just kind of takes care of the cells that are producing sperm. So they call them nurse cells. They used to call them Sertoli cells. That's another name. Finally, the last set of cells that are associated with the testes, they're not in the seminiferous tubules. However, they're between the seminiferous tubules. This is something that we usually also study in the endocrine system. These are known as the interstitial cells. Again, notice guys, they're not in the seminiferous tubules. They're located in between, and their job is to produce testosterone. So At the end of this chapter, we'll go back to looking at the seminiferous tubules, and we'll talk about how they produce the sperm cells. Okay, so that concludes this lesson on the scrotum and the testes.